Hi, this is Jim Wright, and in Postbuilder Lesson 3 we'll learn more about G-codes. The lesson plan for this lesson is to add and remove a G-code from an existing line. We'll also create a new line of G-code or a block. We'll take a look at the option settings for G-codes such as force output, optional, and some others. Then we will modify sequence numbers. Finally, we'll change the format of some G-codes and then review what we've done. As a reminder, this lesson builds on the previous lesson. We have already created a post for a 3-axis mill using the standard FNUC 6M control. Let's get started. As I look at my posted output on the very first line, I see that I have 4 G-codes on the very same line. Most machines today will allow that, but some of the older controls will not allow that many G-codes on one line. So the first thing I want to do is move that 4th G-code to a separate line all by itself. Close the posting dialog, minimize NXCam or Cam Express for now. Now, I'm in the Program and Toolpath tab of Postbuilder, and as I mentioned in the previous lesson, there are several tabs and we were going to explore those as we started using them. Well, today I'm in the Program sub-tab and I want to explore that just a little bit. This is where a majority of the work that you do in Postbuilder will get done, because the Program sub-tab has the 5 major sequences that happen during any given program. First off is the program start sequence, what's going to happen at the beginning of the program. Next, it's followed up by the operation start sequence. Now, the operation start sequence will run every time there is a new operation. So in my example, I have 10 operations. The operation start sequence will run 10 times, once for each operation, as opposed to the program start sequence, which only runs once at the beginning of the program. Once inside the program start sequence, there are several things that go on. There's machine control statements, there's motion, can cycles, miscellaneous, and then finally we get to the operation end sequence. Just like the operation start sequence, this sequence will happen every time the operation ends. So it will also equal the number of operations you have in the program. And then finally, we have the program end sequence. And this dictates what happens at the end of the program. You can see that we're going to output an M02, we'll turn sequence numbers off, and then we output a %, or the rewind stop code for this machine. So, let's go back to the program start sequence. And you may have noticed when I was here earlier that there is a line or a block of code that matches identically what we had at the very first line of the program. So this is the program start sequence: G90, G21, G40, G17. If I want to edit that, I simply click on it. This particular block is called absolute mode block, and it contains these 4 words: G90, G21, G40, G17. I mentioned that my machine could only handle 3 G-codes at a time, so I want to move one of these G-codes to a new line all by itself. So I'll just arbitrarily pick G40, move it up to the trash can, and release. Now I have 3 G-codes in this line. I choose OK, and I now have 3 G-codes in that block. But I still need that G40 code output. How do I do that? There's a drop-down bar here that allows me to create a new block or a custom command, which we'll talk about later on. Or I can grab one of the existing blocks that are already there. Notice that I have a G40 block already. That's fairly easy. I could just grab that, but I want to show you how to create a new block. So let me go up and say New Block, and then I'll simply drag that down to the position where I want to add it. Now, what is the block name? Well, I like to give it a significant name, not just start of program. So let's call it Cutter comp off. No spaces are allowed in block names, so I'm using the underscore. Now I can add that G40 word back in. Notice that as I hover over each G word group, I get a listing of the possible words that are from that group. There's my G cutcom group with G40 cutcom off. I choose it and add it to the list. Now I choose OK, and the new line has been added to my Start a Program event. Let's test that. Save the post. Return to NXCam and post processed with the modified post. Now I have G90, G20, G21 followed by G40 on a separate line. One more thing about G-codes. Notice as I go in here and look at this particular G-code group, if I use mouse button 3, there are options that I can turn on or off. I can make this word optional. What that means is if there's no value assigned for that, we are not going to output the G word. I can also tell it no word separator. In that case, there will be no space between that and the next word in line. I can also force the output. That will cause this G-code to be output even if it's the same value as was previously output from this group. Finally, I can change the element. I don't recommend doing this. I recommend leaving it as whatever the G40 cutcom group is. If I want to edit it, I get a peek into the value that it's coming off of. It's coming off of a mom expression. Later on, when we talk about TCL, we'll learn all about mom codes and mom values. Next, I would like to change the values that come out with the line numbers or the sequence numbers in the actual programs. You may have noticed that it started with 10, so the first line was N10, and it incremented by 10 also, so the next line was N20. That was a very common practice back in the old days of handwriting code, because you wanted to leave extra line numbers in case you needed to add or subtract some G-codes to the listing. But today that's really not necessary. So I want to resequence my line numbers starting with 1 and incrementing by 1. We do that under NC Data Definitions tab. And there is a sub-tab for NC Data Definitions called Other Data Elements. I click on that. Sequence number start is currently set to 10. I'll change that to 1. Sequence number increment is set to 10. I'll change that to 1 also. And the sequence number frequency is set to 1. That means how often will I output a block number. For machines with limited memory, perhaps we only want to output a line number every so often. So let's increase that to 10. Sequence number maximum means at what point should I reset the sequence numbering. In this case, it shouldn't be more than the format value for that word. We'll explain that in just a minute. I'll save this value. And test it. I have a block number 1 at the 10th line of my code, block number 2 at the 20th line of my code, block number 3 at the 30th line of my code. I'll change that back because I do like having block numbers or sequence numbers on every block. Sequence numbers start at 1. I'll increment by 1, and I'll do it on every line. Now let's address this sequence number maximum. Right now, the sequence number will start over again after 9999 sequence numbers. You can find out what format that word is using if you click on the Word subtab under NC Data Definitions. I scroll down to the N word, which is the sequence word, and I see that it's using the digit 4 format. What that means is it will output 4 digits to the left of the decimal place. If I edit that, I can see that format more clearly. The format for the N word is numeric. It is not outputting a decimal point. It does output leading zeros, and it outputs trailing zeros. We could turn off the output leading zeros, but this digit 4 format may be used in other places. So before we do that, let's create a new format for the sequence word. I'll choose Cancel. Then I'll choose New Format. I'll call the new format Sequence Number. It's a numeric format. I would like 5 places to the left of the decimal point. I will not output a decimal point. I will not output any values after the decimal point. I will output trailing zeros. I will not output leading zeros. Choose OK. Now with this change, I can make the new maximum value an extra digit long. And if we violate that, I can truncate the value so that it restarts over from 0. Let's test that. Now I have block numbers on every line, no leading zeros. I do have trailing zeros. Let's do the same thing for the format for the G-code words, because after all, G0 and G00 are the same thing. M6 and M06 are the same thing. So let's eliminate leading zeros for the format for G-code words. We do that in the same way. Notice that there are multiple G-code words here, so I could change the format for one, or I could modify the digit 2 format and change it for all of them. That's what I plan to do. Edit. 2 places to the left of the decimal point, none to the right. Do not output a decimal point. Do not output leading zeros. We do need trailing zeros because we don't want G1 or G01 to be mistaken for G10. Choose OK. Save that. Notice that now the leading 0 in front of M6 and the leading 0 for G00 are both gone. That tells me that the M word was using the same format as the G words. But we do have trailing zeros when it's required. So I'm very happy with that change. Finally, before we leave this lesson, do you remember under Program and Toolpath, at the program start sequence, we created a new line or a new block called Cutter Comp Off? Another place to see that block is under NC Data Definitions, the Block subtab. You'll see that Cutter Comp Off has been added to the list, and there's the G code that's in that block. You can look at the others. In fact, this is the one that we modified earlier to remove that G40 code. Be careful when modifying a block. Some blocks are only used in one place, but many are used in multiple places. There is a way to tell. If I go back to the Program and Toolpath tab, and I look at the program start sequence, if a block is blue, it is being used in multiple places. If a block is white, it is only being used in that one place. If I were to go to the program end sequence and add that new block that I created, Cutter Comp Off, notice that it is now a blue block here and at the beginning. To review, you learned how to add or remove a G-code from an existing line. You learned how to create a new line of G-code or a new block. We looked at some of the option settings for G-codes. We also modified sequence numbers and changed the format of some G-codes. Some tips I need to share with you. Be careful when you're changing an existing format. It may be used for a word group that you're not prepared to modify. To be safe, create a new format. New blocks will appear where they are used and at NC Data Definitions at the Block subtab. You can edit those new blocks in either place. Question: why are some blocks blue and others white? White blocks are only being used once. They change to blue when they're being used more than one time. Thanks for viewing. In our next lesson, we'll take a look at tool changes and how they're built.